Hello and welcome. My name is Jo Frost, and here with my co-host Peter Lynas, this is Being Human. Afternoon, Peter.
Good afternoon on a wet summer's day, which seems to be our summer so far.
I was going to try so hard not to mention the weather as our obligatory opening line, but you did it for me.
I did. But listen, that's the reality. But I'm trying to get out to get my vitamin D, which is loosely linked to our topic. You got to get outside, get light, get out, even if it's wet. It's still good for you.
No, I'm all right. Thanks. But we are in the summer season, and this actually, sad times, everybody cry. This is our last episode of this season. Can you believe it?
Yeah. Sorry, it sounds very sad news.
Do you think that means you're not going to talk to me again? You're sadly mistaken.
People are celebrating. Look, some people will be blissfully beside a pool listening to this. That's what I like to believe. Sunning themselves on a holiday, on a run, on a jog, loving life.
Okay, you had me until the last two. But yes, we are finishing out this season as we've explored cultural stories and big topics with the Being Human lens. We are ending out with health, wellness, food, sleep, and all things of being healthy. This was a big one for you. Why did you want us as Being Human to explore this topic?
Because I actually think it's really interesting. Our cultural stories are totally confused, totally contradictory on their relationship with our bodies and our health. And to be human is to be embodied, to be fueled up in some shape or form, to be fed, to function in a world of plant-based diets and Zoe apps and ultra-processed food and gym memberships and sleep monitoring and you name it, all the apps that we have on our phone. So I just think it's fascinating. You go, particularly when I'm traveling, you come past all the adverts, be it on the tube or in the airport. Here's the perfect body, here's the makeup, here's the clothes, here's the supplements, here's the gym you should be a member of, and then here's the junk food, and here's the sugary drinks you should also be filling your body with. And you're like, this is a weird amalgam of stories we're trying to navigate.
So we are going to use the Being Human lens to explore so many of these different aspects and facets of what it means to be healthy and how that affects our idea of being human, the cultural stories that give us a framework and a shaping of our humanity, but also what maybe the God story has to share about living a better story. So we're going to use Being Human lens. We're going to mix it up a little bit and start in presence. So a reminder that the presence quadrant, the aspect of the Being Human lens, is where we explore the fact that being human, being here and now matters. We are present in a body, in a place, in a season, in a time. So how does our health, our well-being, the things that we put in our body, the way we use our body, how does that affect our humanity? We're then going to go back up to the top and have a look at significance. You matter. This is the place for our identity. How does our body shape our identity? How does our identity shape how we perceive our bodies? It's also the place for dignity and equality. These are massive aspects when it comes to our health and wellness. We move round to connection, how we relate to each other. We matter to each other. What does health mean when it comes to our relationships, to justice and to peace? And finally, we look at participation. The difference we make in the world matters. This is our action space. So it is our freedom, our power, and our purpose, responsibilities that are both autonomous but also collective, and all the while asking, what do the pages of the God story tell us about how to live truly, fully human lives? So, Peter, presence, being here now matters. What do you see our cultural stories telling us when it comes to health and our bodies?
We are embodied beings, and our bodies are impacted by the food that we eat, by how healthy or fit that we are, the amount of sleep that we have. I think we all experienced that a few weeks ago. Our neighbour's alarm went off at 1 a.m. And then every hour after that, it went off again. And it's a holiday home, and we texted them, and they said, "Oh, I think it seems to be fine." And then the next night at 2:30, it went off again in the morning. I was like, "This is like a literal nightmare." It feels, and I was like, "I can't function." I remember when we had young children, and this used to be a reality, and now I'm going one or two interruptions ruins my sleep. And there's this narrative that Margaret Thatcher, who some of our older listeners might remember, the first female prime minister, functioned on 4 hours sleep, There are these kind of stories of these superhero CEO types who do that. Is that even true? And is it good? And certainly now the narrative is definitely not. Like, we need sleep, and it's not a good aspiration to try and function on that little. One of the first things for me was just like, there's so much chat around sleep. Somebody was saying recently, actually, don't ask people, how are you? Our classic question, ask, how are you sleeping? If you want to really crack things open. Because I have lots of friends who say, oh yeah, things are fine. How you sleep? Yeah, fine. And then you pursue a little bit. And it's by fine, I woke once or twice during the night, maybe watch something, went back to bed, or just lay in bed, watch. Oh wow, your definition of a good night's sleep is 1 or 2 wakings and maybe reading something or looking at something. That seems quite different than mine. So sleep is just one of these multiple ways in which I think being present is such a big factor on how we operate in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question. If I think back to the times that I've asked somebody about their sleep, it goes deep really fast, because it's not just about the physical health of a person. It's about what's on their mind. It's about how they're interacting with their world, that busy mind sense. My husband is not my biggest fan sometimes when it comes to sleep, because he doesn't sleep particularly well at all, and I sleep brilliantly and I snore. So it's double blessing for him. But without sleep, I just don't function. And it is the biggest gift. And yet we have this weird narrative that you're a better person. You're often a better Christian if you sleep less or get up early or limit in some way. Your sleep is something that you can train your body not to need. And I find that fascinating, because I don't see that in scripture. Laziness, sure, but sleep is a gift from God and our bodies need it. My favorite phrase from somebody is, if you want to know what God means by grace, look at the fact that he has literally designed the human body for a third of its existence to do absolutely nothing. He designed us to need and flourish through sleep. So yes, our bodies and our health is dependent on our resting.
Yeah, and so sleep is definitely an issue. Jonathan Haidt, who we've cited before, talks about 50% of teenage girls, 40% of teenage boys in the US are getting less than 7 hours sleep. And I read that and just thought, I don't know how those people function. I can't function, certainly not consistently, on less than that amount of sleep. So I've definitely moved from a narrative where I'd be like, yeah, I go to bed late, get up early. That was almost a bit of a bravado thing to, I don't. I need a 7 to 8 hours sleep to function well. And most people need something in that. Now, we're not obsessed by sleep, and that's just one aspect. One of the other big ones for me is the difference between health span and lifespan. So we're obsessed with living longer, like how long we generally, as a human race, our lives are getting longer. I think it's 1 in 4 people born in the last few years might live to be 100. Now, that has tapered off recently, life expectancy heading up into the early 80s and tapering. But that's lifespan. There's a 10-year gap between lifespan and what they call health span, the amount of time you're healthy and alive. And we're obsessed with eking out the last few years, often with high levels of medical intervention. And we're often less interested, and I think it's beginning to shift a bit on how much we're healthy during that time. Why I Hope to Die at 75 is an article in The Atlantic of a guy saying, I want to die healthy and then just die rather than get this eked out miserly existence towards the end. So I think big question about how we do that, because what we eat and our sleep and other things about how healthy we are have a big impact on the health of our existence. And that's why we're interested, for me at least, in this in presence, because if we're not alive, we're not present. And then if we're not alive and healthy, we're not, there's limitations to our presence in that moment. Now, some of those are inevitable, just age and conditions, but some of those we have more control over than we're sometimes prepared to concede, especially on the inputs we put in, like food, into our bodies, and the sleep that we take. And those all have impact on our health and then the healthy present life that we can lead.
Yeah. A friend of mine was talking about the idea, obviously hadn't seen the Being Human lens, that there are 3 aspects to being human. He was saying that it's wealth, health, and time. And that when you're younger, you have health and time, but you don't have any wealth. When you're middle-aged, you have health and wealth, but you have no time. And when you're older, you have wealth and time, but you have no health. And that, obviously, this is massively generalizing. But I think that's really interesting, that actually our health is something that we can't take for granted. Our bodies aren't this optional extra to our humanity. We have to care for them. And the way we look after our bodies, or the way our bodies operate in this world, has a massive impact on our humanity. So when you suffer from ill health, it has a ripple effect. When you are trying to maintain your health, that has consequences on your engagement. And there are so many different facets to our physical health, our mental well-being, but you can't compartmentalize them. That when you think I'm just going to focus on this aspect or I'm going to focus on that aspect, what you fail to sometimes recognize is that we are a system, that all of these things feed into each other. And I think that gets lost in some of the kind of social media or the research or this little bit. Like, if you fix this one part of your health program, then you are going to be healthy. And you don't look at us as a whole being here and now and realize what impact that can have on your health.
Definitely. And that's tilting us into the better story, because we've called this wellness because that's probably the cultural storyline. Wholeness would be the other way we'd probably often talk about it. And it's, we are to be fruitful and multiply. It's where we're here to steward and to cultivate creation. Part of that's going to be our own bodies, but also the bodies of others around us. Like, we have to take a more holistic view, not simply of my personal health, but our collective health as a society. We've done that as parents. We've chatted about it before, like the food that we give our kids, the sleep that they get is often heavily directed by us as parents. Sometimes people say, how do you get your kids to eat healthy food? I'm like, we don't give them an alternative. It's this food or no food. And it's this going to bed, because guess what? That's something that we as parents do get to control. And sleep is a gift, and young people need more sleep, even though they like to think they don't. And that's one of the things that we do in gathered communities, is gather together in a real present way. So it's deeply embedded in our Christian story and the God story about being present and being fully present in those moments, fully embodied in those moments. But the body keeps the score on that. The body takes the impact of trauma. We want to see healing of the body in the here and now. But I remember going out with some of the Healing on the Streets guys in my own church, and one of the first things they did was ask questions about, when did this condition occur? What was going on in your life at the time? And more often than not, somebody would say it started a couple of years ago and there was a thing in the family, or it was a bit of a trauma, an incident or something else. And it was just because I was like, let's go, let's pray. And the person was like, let's ask a little bit more about what's going on, so we know what we're actually praying into, because often it's not the presenting condition. They were just asking questions to get behind. And Rose was reading this book, The Body Keeps the Score. And I haven't read all of it by any stretch, but that was definitely the underlying. So much of the physical trauma that we have, like, impacts on our body from lots of events in the past. So again, looking at the importance of bodies in that way in terms of our health, I think is just a huge part of what we need to be doing as Christians in this moment.
We've got really interesting case studies in scripture. So I was reading Daniel recently and just being reminded again that when Daniel and his friends are being brought into the Babylonian court, the king wants all of his virile young men to eat off the king's table, all the rich food, all the best wine, all this kind of wealth and trappings. And Daniel turns around and says, I'm not going to corrupt my body with this food. And so offers a test. If you just let us eat water and vegetables and see how my body copes. And 10 days later, they are healthier than the rest of the court. And so the guard lets them eat their diet. There's this idea that simple food, gifts from creation, rather than the richness and the kind of Babylonian version of processed food, actually there's something really simple about what we put into our bodies from creation actually helps produce health. And I'm not saying a Daniel diet or go and do some fasting or whatever. I'm not suggesting that. But I do think that there is something really precious about recognizing that God's good creation creates health in our bodies. And the other place for me is to look at the story of Elijah when he was going through a mental health crisis, and he was depressed and anxious and had suicidal ideation. He runs away, and God gifts him with a nap and with a simple meal, because he said, the journey ahead of you is too much for you. You need to rest first. The importance of sleep, the importance of putting into your body what you need in order to be able to progress and move forward. And I think the simplicity of that moment, sleep. If the world is too much for you, have a nap. get some good food in your body, and you will be able to process and deal with things so much better than you will when you're tired, when you're overwhelmed. It'll help you get perspective. This isn't the solution to everything, but it's a very good starting point.
Yes. Absolutely, and those examples are great. And I think this is where you get the God story. You get both principles, you get stories, and you get a lot encouraging us. We've looked at presence, we move to significance, which takes us to the top of the lens and does drive us towards the kind of image identity, which is so intertwined with body in our culture at this moment, and health. Looking at identity and body image is massive. Body positivity, body negativity, body neutrality. So much of our visual culture on Instagram. If you put in health or food or any of those things in, it's so quick in throwing you. I started looking for food on something, and this guy Eating with Todd, and suddenly I'm just getting loads of these like huge best Sunday roast in London, best burger, best everything.
My algorithm does not feed me that.
I get it now. As soon as you look at a pair of running shoes once, boom, just all you'll get is that. Whatever the thing is, it's very quick to do that. But that has huge shaping influence, be it diets, be it obesity, be it Ozempic, this new kind of game-changing weight loss drug. On so many levels, we're getting fed things that are driving at our image, and so many contradictory stories again around that.
I love it. The algorithm is very clever because it has never tried to sell me a big Sunday lunch. It's never tried to sell me running shoes, and it's never tried to sell me a Zimpic. I'm definitely getting fed different stories. But I think that's the point, that actually so much of the stories we encounter and we inhabit, there is this feedback loop. The things that we think are the way we should be shaping ourselves, our health, our bodies, our image, are so dependent on some of the stories that come in, and yet those stories are fractured. So I get a lot of plant-based food stuff. I get a lot of perimenopausal things. I get a lot of how to lose weight over 40. I've never been advertised running shoes. And it's just fascinating because it almost makes me think maybe I should be thinking about whether or not I need to lose weight. Maybe I should be thinking about having a plant-based diet. No, I'm not. I'm absolutely fine. But because I'm being fed these stories, they affect my sense of image because they are being held up as a mirror, as if I am saying I need it. And so this idea of image and identity, of how I see myself, is so dependent on the stories that I'm being fed. And they start to shift and shape my own understanding of what healthy looks like, my own understanding of what my body should look like, of how I should see and perceive myself. And yet, they may be a completely different storyline to yours, our colleagues, our friends, our family.
The identity piece again drives us image. We've also got dignity and identity, and it's so interesting, like the kind of right or lack of right to food and to sleep in some of the conversations. So it's interesting the rights we want to assert and some of the conversations are had, and yet the other things that we don't, like so much of what we take in isn't really food in any meaningful definition of food. It's like ultra processed food, which I don't think is food. So much of the healthy food is either seen as and sometimes is a luxury item. There's a whole conversation about the accessibility of that. Sleep, it's great. We can talk about that as people who do a 9 to 5-ish type office-based job. Of course, there are blurring of that, but that's nothing like those who are working shift patterns, who are working multiple jobs. Sleep's a luxury in many places, and healthcare, theoretically, free at the point of need. Under huge pressure now as to whether that's true. Dental care already really isn't. Most healthcare really isn't. Anything beyond the basics isn't. And we're seeing that. And we know the Food Foundation has said on current trends, more than 80% of children born in 2022 will survive to the age of 65, but will be overweight or obese. 1 in 20 of them will already have died due to those reasons. So that's a massive issue in terms of accessibility to healthy food. And then that leads to obesity, which requires more healthcare, often from those who are least able to afford that healthcare.
The question of equality and health is a key aspect of this significance, that actually the more significant you are, the more access you have to health. And so the question becomes, do we live in a society where the privileged are healthy and the disenfranchised are not? Is the access to healthy food, health care, healthy living, sleep, is that an equal opportunity? Or is there inequality in our society that says healthy, nutritious food is more expensive or it's more time consuming? So this was a big one for me. single mum down the road, 3 kids, holds down 2 jobs. Yes, she could probably feed her kids just as cheaply with home cooked meals and fresh ingredients. But the time it takes to make those meals, she can either do that or she can be out holding down the second job to pay for the rent. And so ultimately, what she ends up doing is bunging a meal in the microwave and feeding the kids chicken nuggets and chips again, because actually it's just as cheap, but it's so less time consuming and she doesn't have the time. So she has to make do, and therefore the health of her and her family deteriorates because they're not getting the nutritious food that they need.
Yeah, so the stats again, healthy food is basically almost 3 times more expensive than fattening food. But I was with a GP friend recently, and he worked on the East End of Glasgow during his kind of early years and talked about intergenerational health, particularly around addictions and alcohol and some of those things and some of the realities of that. But he now works in a different context, but part of his time is in a private sector environment where he says that the other side of that is you have people now who have almost limitless resources and are just looking for a problem. So they've got so much health anxiety. They are in all the time because they can afford to be, and they are searching for almost any level of problem. And he says, ironically, in many ways, they're no better off because they want to spend their money on health. This is their number one priority. There's very little wrong with many of them, but they are searching almost for constantly check this. So again, at different levels, I think there are multiple narratives around this, that health can become a real driver, because for many of us, we do place significance in health. So I'm somebody who's reasonably fit and healthy, and I have to be careful on the other side that doesn't become a drive. I have many friends for whom this defines them. Running marathons, at the gym, being healthy, Instagram images of that is very important to who they are and their identity. And for others, it's a real area of shame and guilt and an issue in a different way. So it's a massive challenge what our society is doing, and it's doing two almost totally contradictory things at the same time, which is really frustrating.
I think dignity in ill health is a massive challenge for our society. Our cultural stories say the more significant you are, the healthier you should be. And therefore, if you are not well, if your body isn't functioning perfectly, if you don't have the beauty or the look or the right figure or the access to the next latest health food fad or whatever, there is a diminishing in how you are treated and how you are perceived. And I think that's deeply challenging when it comes to our assertion that all human beings are worthy of dignity and respect. That is not dependent. It's not dependent on who you are. It's not dependent on how your body works or doesn't. It is not dependent on your mental health or ill health or the crisis that you're going through. You are worthy of dignity and respect. And that is a very contested storyline in our society today.
Yes, because our significance is rooted in the one whose image we bear. So again, not in our image, but in the one whose image we bear. And that is the positive message we want to continually be pushing and driving people back to. But there's not a tension. I think there's a really interesting and rather than about that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, that we follow Jesus was resurrected, who was healed but remained scarred. So we have to live with some of that in our own bodies. We will have scarring, we will have disability, we will have imperfections, we will have incidents that have happened to us or illnesses or things that we bear. And positively, I think there's a challenge sometimes in the discipleship journey that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, and that is a one way in which we honor God. And I think there's something that we have to also talk about there, about how we use our bodies positively to do that, not just in the things that we do, but how we treat our bodies fundamentally as temples. And so we're holding, again, there are complexities and nuances in the God story. Again, probably we could push around that. So we've now looked at presence down at the bottom. We have looked at significance up at the top. Now we're going on the horizontals. We're going first to participation, the way we live out into the world, and because the health of our bodies affects our ability to make a difference in various ways. It affects, I'm not saying limit, so that has an impact, particularly work, but not only that. And we're having challenges about the way that we work in a more sedentary society. We're both sitting in an office today. That's not always our posture, but it's often part of it. That alone is a shift. And health has a massive impact on our ability to participate and to make a difference in the world around us.
Yeah, I think you and I may differ in how much participation we do towards our health. I am not very good at finding alternatives to the sedentary lifestyle.
Because
But
I'm
that's what
standing
this
up at
is.
a standing desk right now to do this podcast, but it's still in an office.
Was again the joy of the app. So I was around my mate's house and they were talking about their step count and how they had totaled like 50,000 steps this day. And I was like, except me walking to your house, I think I've done 50 all day. And the look of horror on my face was really quite high. It's because I'd stayed up all night to watch the election. So I was quite tired the next day. So I didn't do very much, but it was worth staying up for.
So yeah, we work and then we go. So then rather than our work being physical and engaging, often we work and then we use the money we've earned to go and become a member of a gym. So we go to the gym on the way home from work. You don't, other people do. We're talking just to other, not everybody does. I'm not saying, but we get, so for lots of people, it's all about their supplements and their gym and their membership. For lots of people, they have no interest now and they're almost saying, no, I reject all that world. Some people, it's very much about the food and their way to participate is what they eat. In lots of both healthy and unhealthy. I'm not like take pictures of it. And then we've got all the kind of tracking that can go on around that. So massive amounts of data. The Zoe app we mentioned right, I think at the start, not on that, but I know other people who are talking about. So this is where you get a little plastic disc in your arm. It's more than that. It's obviously getting access to information in your bloodstream.
Within 6 months, you are going to have a plastic disc on your arm.
It's because I'm not, I don't, we'll see. I do like data. I know, and I'm an Enneagram 5 and I like information, but I have resisted to do it. I won't get an Apple Watch because it's way too distracting for me to get all these and too much information coming at me at one go. But for people that are addicted to health, they love it. But there's massive amounts of questions then about how much of the information, how ethical is it to know all this stuff about people, to be tracking them all the time, and you then could have a better idea when they're going to die and all sorts of things happening to them. Listening to something a couple of days ago, it's about the cost of a life. A Guardian journalist said most of the insurance companies could tell you when you're going to die if they accessed all the information they had about you, but then ethically they wouldn't know what to do about that. They probably know more about us again than ourselves. Those apps are going to allow us, and they've all voluntarily agreed not to use all that information right now to absolutely target it, because basically they don't want to have the conversation that tells you, we think statistically you're about to die at 55, so we don't want to give you life insurance. That's the only reason that's holding them back. But this raises lots of questions about the kind of data being held about us.
That's fascinating. Oh, and scary. I think for me, where we get really interesting over the health conversation in participation is what you and I are often talking about, which is this chaotic story clash where everybody is personally responsible for living their best possible life while not ruining it for everybody else. And therefore, the level of responsibility on you to work out what your ideal and perfect health plan is, how much sleep is optimal for you, what the Zoe thing says is your diet for you, how to track your mental health, what CB, everything has to be completely and personally tailored to your body and to your needs. And that's on you to work out. That in order for you to flourish, in order for you to thrive, the responsibility is on your shoulders to make sure that you are living the best possible and healthy lifestyle. And if you're not doing it, it's because you failed at life in some way. You're not rich enough, you're not healthy enough, you're not dedicated enough, you're not driven enough. That in some way you are lacking or you are less than if you have not yet worked out your optimal lifestyle, so that you can have the optimum healthy lifespan. And that is a completely corrupt understanding of what it means to participate in the world and the responsibility that you have in order for you to live a full life.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think so it's individual and there's loads of influencers at varying levels. The older generation, it's the Hugh Fearnley Whittingstalls, whatever, the old chef who's now saying eat 30 plants a week. There are loads of micro influencers that none of us have probably even heard of. You get to 50,000 Instagram followers now and you can start to maybe not live off that, but certainly drive income off it. There are loads of people with 500,000 followers who none of us will know, but there's whole pockets of people who are really obsessed with their thing. It could be meditation, it can be exercise, it can be psychological, it can be food orientated. and they're all influencing our ways of participating. And it feels like all my friends are now personal trainers and counselors. Like it feels like that's what everybody's now retraining to do, at least on the side, if not full time. And that's not necessarily bad, nor is it necessarily good. It's again how we're shaping, it goes to our significance a little bit, and how we participate and engage in the world and the impact it begins to have in terms of the God story. One of the things I love around that is the Benedictine monks and the Benedictine rules. So that we see Benedict, if you're familiar with them at all, you might be time prayer and you're up at 4 a.m. and doing your prayers. But they also had rules around food, around alcohol consumption, and rules around work. So the Benedictine monasteries were actually really good kind of entrepreneurial setups. They had lots of land. They were very productive monasteries. So the monks worked in them, the gardens, the farms, and then famously potentially the beer and the kind of food that came out of those, buckfast and things like that out of some of these monks. So they were really engaged in a very holistic way in how you did all of these things. So the rules around prayer were also rules, had these linked rules with food. And again, Bible fasting, big craze around intermittent fasting in various ways, whether it's the 16-8, whether you do it overnight, or whether it's 5-2. But fasting, again, is an idea that we read about again and again in the Bible, and we'll come to practices, but I like the ways that it looks and frames some of our participation. So again, I think the God story was really good at giving us some of those examples in the ways of engaging productively and holistically into some of these spaces.
Love that. Love that. All right, let's move over to connection, our last place. We matter to each other and the impact relationships have on our health and well-being. Peter, what do you see?
Probably food comes in here. We've hinted at it a few times, but for me, the food engagements, food is such a connection space. You eat so often with other people, and yet in our culture today, less so, when we're less connected with the people who either make our food, grow our food, or that we eat the food with, because we're on the move, we're grabbing snacks, and we're eating it in certain ways. I've mentioned before this ultra processed food. So much of what we eat isn't really food in any meaningful way. We've lost connection then with the growers of that food. And then we spend massive amounts of money, £74 billion a year in the NHS to deal with excess weight. And we're tinkering at the edges with sugar taxes and things like that, whereas we're not really having a proper conversation about the cost of not eating well. Because food is a beautiful thing in which we gather together and share food and do life together. So much of eating is a communal activity, or certainly was and still is in lots of spaces. So something we try and do here in the house for sure is do that. We love eating out with other people. We love having people in our space, and just trying, even in EA, we have a kind of common table area where often we'll do lunch together. It's one of our practices as an organization within the Evangelical Alliance. So trying in small ways to set that communal nature of food, that it's a shared thing. What are you eating? Oh, people from different cultures, people with different food interests, that food is a space to come together.
Friend of the podcast, friend of ours, Phil Knox. So he, in his book Best of Friends, he talks about the idea that it is statistically healthier to eat a kebab with friends than it is to eat a salad alone. That so much of our health is dependent on our relationships. That somebody who is lonely and isolated, no matter how well they eat, how much exercise they do, how many apps they're downloading, their health and well-being is so dependent on relationships and community that if you are isolated or in some way detached from those around you, that makes life so much harder. And I think especially around ill health, that can instantly be a really isolating issue, that you retreat, you withdraw, that you are either in pain, or the engagement that you have in some way compounds the issue of ill health in your life. And so it is easier to separate, and then it becomes a vicious cycle, whether it's physical or mental ill health. That separation from people is often a preserving technique and tactic, and yet can often compound or exacerbate problems. So for those who are around those who are struggling, working out connection points, those little moments in, those little touch points, those little notes, engaging with somebody who's going through ill health at a relational level can do so much. If you are familiar with our aspects within the connection space, not only does connection talk about relationships, but it also talks about justice. And for me, this is where we touched a little bit around that idea of privilege and wealth. But the idea that health is a justice issue, especially in the UK, but certainly in other spaces around the world, I think that shouldn't be overlooked. So 7.3% of UK households experienced food poverty in 21, and that has now risen to 15%. It's doubled. So we are getting poorer in our access to healthy food. People are struggling with hunger. People are struggling with isolation. There is a justice issue attached to our health in this country. And the more aware we are of that, and the more engaged we are in that, and the more connected we are in that, the more capable we are of pursuing justice and hungering for peace.
Yeah, and food's not the only thing, but just keeping on food for a second, Michael Pollan says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's a summary of a massive book where he's thought about food. But again, for me, there's a justice aspect there because the mostly plants challenges me. I quite like meat, but we talked about it before in Creation Care. Not everybody can eat the kind of lifestyle that we have globally. That's not possible. And actually eating plants is one of the ways that challenges that because that's much more sustainable. And again, it moves us to a kind of food justice idea. Like who can eat in the way that we all eat, and again, our local connection sometimes with the farmers, our ability to grow even small things ourselves. Again, teaching kids where do these things come from. Lots of ways in which this raises the justice question, as well as the global conversation about the way in which we in the UK do stuff, which is where we're based, in terms of how others do it globally. And so I think that justice point comes in a number of ways for us in that connection conversation. And the reality going forward is that food and water are going to be two of the big kind of points because in looking ahead for peace, stroke war, these are contentious points. The war in Ukraine reminded us as to where our bread comes from. It's the breadbasket of Europe. Many of the battles in the Middle East are around water sources and supplies. It's not always talked about. But again, as we think health going forward and ability to live in the world, there are huge movements of people coming, yes, because of climate change, but a lot of that's linked to food and to water and some of the basic necessities in life again. So this is going to drive our bigger global conversations around connection and migration. And for us, this is the interconnected nature of the Being Human lens. It's one of the reasons we're in a wrap-up episode. We could go on most of these topics forever, and we're like, these things all make sense, we think, in a global story as to how we responsibly care for the other in these moments. So we've looked at presence, we've looked at significance, and then we've looked at participation and connection and how that drives us in. We always want to land on practices that are specific to some of the things we're talking about in terms of health and wellness and kind of food and sleep in this moment. So, Jo, a standout practice for you in this moment?
Okay, I have to say hospitality because we've already covered it. You've talked about the idea of sharing a meal with people, sharing food with people, the breaking of bread, the communion meal, this communal practice of sharing food with each other is massive. But I do think just linking to some of our conversations about privilege, about justice, about poverty, about difference, it reminds me of our podcast a season ago with Natalie Williams about how meals are shared according to class. So she went round a friend's house, and for the first time ever in her life, she saw pots of food placed in the center of a table, and she was meant to serve her own portions. She'd never had a meal like that. She was always served a plated meal in front of her with her portion on her plate. And it was a completely different culture. So to be hospitable in that moment is to recognize actually, how do I welcome and include the person coming into my space so that the rules of engagement are as welcoming and inclusive as possible? Or how do I flip the power imbalance and go and be hosted, go and be the guest in somebody where they get to tell me what the rules are? Because ultimately a meal's a meal. So let's just share it. And I think that idea of hospitality, but also recognizing that food has so much cultural baggage attached to it, and how we share food changes according to the cultures that we're in, is just a really important thing to remember. But because I always cover hospitality, I want to have two. And it's not on our list because we have notes and I'm going off piste, but it's right at the end of the episode. So I think I've done quite well. This was about generosity. I was listening to Tim Mackey, who's been going through the Sermon on the Mount for for the last year. And he was talking about this idea that the eye is the lamp to your body. And he was talking about this being the eye is the source of wholeness, of wellness, of health. And they were using Jesus's little parable about the eye is a lamp to the body. And if the eye is healthy, the rest of the body is healthy. And he was suggesting that it's a pun, that when the eye sees opportunities to be generous, it creates an entirely healthy body. When the eye sees opportunity to be stingy or greedy or hoarding, that produces ill health in the body. And I thought that was a really interesting flip on so much of our cultural stories around what it means to be healthy, because so much of it is focused inward. How do I eat well? How do I exercise well? How do I make sure I am as healthy as I possibly can be? And yet in this moment, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is saying, go and be generous. Go and find opportunities to bless. Go and find opportunities to give, because the more outward focused you are, the healthier your body will be. The more inward focused you are, greedy, hoarding, stingy, the more unhealthy your body would be. So it's a very counterintuitive practice, but practicing generosity, according to Jesus, helps produce a healthy life.
Brilliant. I think really helpful, and I'll give you two, because hospitality was like a given. You were always going to say that. It's like a bingo game for anybody who listens regularly. Yeah, Joe has said hospitality. I would want to mention fasting. Now, we're always conscious of the caveats around that, and people need to understand where they are, and they may need to get advice around that. But that also, so if food is a real wrestle place for them, but we also want to say that actually there is a way. Fasting is a phenomenal way of putting food in its rightful place and taking some of the hold of food away. It's probably something I do engage with. Tend to do the 16/8, so overnight fasting. And I love food, but it is remarkable how relatively easy it is to step away from it once you decide to. And then there's a question of what you want to put in place of that. So we'll do that as an organization when we're praying into something specific. So I think that's where it's helpful in terms of the hold that food can have over our lives. But I also think simplicity is a really good one, because this isn't solely about food. We have talked about it. It's an important aspect of it. But actually things like sleep, again, there are simple routines before bed. There's keeping your bedroom cool. There's getting away from screens a little bit beforehand, and then just getting into the practice. It might take breathing. Different people have different experiences. I think both you and I find sleep relatively simple, and both of our spouses find it more challenging. Rose says, I'm just close your eyes and go to sleep. And she goes, that's not helpful. So I appreciate different people find each of these issues. So we're going to have different areas. But it's some of this, even with the health stuff, there's a simplicity. It doesn't have to have all the best gear and all the best kit and all the best gyms and all these things. It might be getting out for a walk or a jog or going swimming or doing cold water stuff, because it's a community of people gathering. There are lots of small and simple ways, or walking to work, or small practices you do, little things you build into your life. So we're big fans of habits around that. We have covered, again, a lot of ground, aware of that. But small steps around either fasting or simplicity can, I think, really help in the areas that we're talking about. But hopefully you're beginning to see how we can use the lens in so many different areas. Contentious issues. I don't think this is contentious in the same way. It's just an all of life issue that sometimes we're a bit reluctant to talk about. We actually spoke before about there aren't that many kind of Christian influencers, if you want to call them that, who talk a lot about food and health. And yet there are so many in so many areas. I'm not saying there are none. I'm sure there are. But it's interesting. And then sometimes there's a kind of sensitivity. Can we talk about this? Should we talk about it? I think we do have to talk about food, health, sleep, what we put in, what we get out. These are massive issues that we need to chat well about. And we've tried to do that round the lens. But as we wrap up the whole series, Joe, I will give you the final words.
Oh, thanks very much, Peter. We've really enjoyed this season, as we've got to show you some of the workings of the lens and how we use it to help explore some of the issues we're more familiar with, but also some of the issues that we're less familiar with. We brought in a couple of extra voices just to help engage and mix it up a bit. But a lot of this is simply trying to ask the question, how do we help spot the world that we're living in and how it's shaping us? But also, how do we invite God and his story to help form and shape us as we seek to live truly, fully human lives? If you have enjoyed these episodes, we would love to hear from you. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, we'd also love to hear that. Send it directly to Peter. That'd be great. But you can email us at beinghuman@eauk.org. You can stalk us on most social media platforms except TikTok, because that'll never happen. You can watch us on YouTube, comment there, and we look forward to coming back with another season of Being Human, probably sometime in the autumn and then into winter. Not that we ever got some, but we live in hope. So until next time, take care, God bless, and we'll see you soon.